Hey folks, do you know this app? This app is called To Be Honest, and the way it works, this is one of the top apps right now in the App Store. And the way it works is you download it, very popular with teens, and then you're asked questions about your friends, and you can only say nice things. You can only say voted most likely to succeed. Some of it's a little cutesy or maybe a little snarky, most likely to do all the quizzes, on BuzzFeed or stuff like that. But it's generally positive, and it's completely addictive because you go on there and your friends, now you don't know who, but you know the people who are in your friends group are saying, voting you the most this, the most that, putting out nice things about you. It makes people happy. Now, why am I talking about this? I assume many of my followers, friends here, supporters, like me, are interested in the latest technologies. You want to know what's happening online. You want to know what teens are using, what kids are doing, how is the latest app changing, interacting with culture, what are the legal issues, policy issues. So you ought to know about TBH. It's a huge phenomenon. It's not on Android yet, to my chagrin. I switch back and forth, as some of you know, since I want to be savvy on both iOS and Android. My kids think that's pretty funny because they're far more adept at delving into swiping, and as many of you know, till today, I'm a bit awkward at using Snapchat. Snapchat actually just joined FPF, so I gotta get a bit better to show off. I showed up at their offices when we were meeting with them the other day wearing my Snapchat spectacles, thinking I would impress, but frankly, it might be more impressive if I learn how to use the filters in the app. But I digress. So now that we've talked about TBH, let me talk about something like the Russian ads that appeared on Facebook, Google, Twitter, and elsewhere. And if you see a connection between the TBH app and what I'm going to talk about, you'll be right. So anyone following the news is aware of the big flap around the fact that the Russians were creating fake sites, fake pages on Facebook, fake websites, and creating inflammatory content. Very often actually finding inflammatory content and just tweaking it a little bit, maybe to make it a little bit more upsetting. So all of the biases that we have in America, do I think Black Lives Matter is too aggressive? Do I think gun nuts are this? Do I think advocates for this, immigrants, you name the hot button issue that people are debating and have very different views and are heated about, they would find, very sophisticated, right? They would find examples of that content and then repurpose it. And then to make sure people saw it, they'd advertise it on Google to get search results. They'd retarget some of those people who went to those sites when they were on Facebook. And some number of people may have seen a post that was sponsored that might not have otherwise appeared in your feed. Now, I don't know about you, I have a pretty diverse set of friends. I've worked in both Democrat and Republican politics. So I got crazy friends on every side of the spectrum. And in day-to-day life, we all get along nice. But it seems like online, they will sometimes spew some of the really divisive stuff. And I will generally be unhappy when I see some of those posts shared by those friends, and I try not to click on it or rebut it because I don't want to see more of them, and debating it online doesn't seem to change their minds. And I've had a couple of friends who, because of how ugly some of the stuff they shared, it definitely impacted our friendship, our worldview. You can put politics aside, but if somebody's worldview is so offensive to you because of the biases that you see them sharing, that makes life a little difficult. And when they're family, you need to deal with it. When you're friends, well, hopefully you can have discussions over time and understand each other better, but you may not want to be seeing that. Well, if someone buys an ad, it's still got to be relevant, but it's one way to help make it more likely that the content you're sharing shows up in those feeds. So it turns out that the Russians did this, and did it even in a targeted way, and whether it made a big difference to the election or not, I don't know. In some ways, they were fanning what was already a lot of division. I don't know if throwing a little more oil onto what was already a roaring fire made a difference, but it's certainly ugly, and it's certainly something we don't want to see happen. So what should happen? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? It is already illegal for a foreign government to buy advertising. And in TV land, I will tell you, TV ads are enormously expensive. I've run for office a number of times in my life. Only one time, when I ran citywide in New York, could I afford to buy TV ads. I'll maybe import them. They're old, not digital videotapes. I ran against Mark Green for citywide office to be the Republican. Yes, I'm a good old Democrat nowadays, but I did run as a Republican and liberal in New York. You can bizarrely be a Democrat and run as the Republican candidate. Makes no sense, but it happens. And I did. I didn't win, and hopefully have done penance and do a lot to try to support Democratic candidates. In those days, it was working for working with first-term Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who was a very different figure than today. He was pro-choice. He was restricting guns. He was a big champion of immigrants, but he did a lot to reduce crime and reform welfare, and I felt comfortable running with him. I bought TV ads. They didn't work. However, we had to spend a lot of money on compliance because you can't just go buy a TV ad for a political action. You've got filings, you've got disclosures. We had a team of lawyers. It was very expensive. And so that's why you don't see generally the Russians or other foreign governments buying ads on national TV or on TV across the board. There is a much more rigorous vetted system. Consider how online ads work. I can buy an ad. Right now, I whip out my credit card and I can go to Facebook, I can go to Twitter, I can go to many of the ad exchanges, and I can buy an ad. And there's a lot of value to that. Anybody running for office, you could be a local candidate. Again, when I was a candidate in New York, I was a state legislator. The New York Times was my daily paper. To get into the New York Times, I had to compete with not only 2 senators, multiple members of Congress, but 40, 50, 60 of the state assembly members who represented New York and the city council. That was not a way for me to get out my word. When I first ran against the local machine, I had to do direct mail. We didn't have enough people online those days that you could do internet ads. But today, you could target just your district, and you could run, any candidate can run. There's no conceivable way that those people can go through the kind of FEC reviews and vettings that the really large campaigns go to. And so it is already against the law. And to the extent that we have Russians or other governments trying to do this, and it worked for them this time, at least it worked in that they got ads out there, we need to look at what can be done to make sure law enforcement and all the other players in the pipeline do more, so we can understand when we see an ad who it actually is from. However, do we want to apply those really strict rules and guarantee that every ad that appears online has gone through a rigorous human or super artificial technological review process? Now, I helped oversee this process at AOL. And in that first generation of online advertising, which certainly wasn't at the scale of today, we had teams of people reviewing ads. And it was a very slow process if you wanted to buy ads. And little players, local candidates or mom and pop shops, did not buy advertising. You had to be a big player because you had to reach all of America or all of a state. You couldn't target locally. And so diverse candidates with different niche opinions, couldn't get their views out there. We would not have had time to individually review millions and millions of small campaigns. Impossible. And when we did review, let me tell you how challenging it was. We don't all agree in this world. Half of those friends of mine that are sharing what I think are very offensive ads, I don't know, they sometimes have a right to share those ads. And if I was the vetter, even if I was trying to be neutral, I would turn down some. Some people would think I'm turning down too many. Some of you who know me know I'm very pro-Israel, family, relationships. I would turn down ads that were biased or bigoted, and the pro-Israel side would say, hey, who's that anti-Semite who's in charge of that? And then I turn down an ad on the other side that was maybe offensive the other way, and the other group would say, well, now I was on their side. And so at various times, me, or AOL in general, because of my teams, were pro-choice, we were anti-choice, we were pro-religious groups, you name the hot button issue, because we were trying to be sort of the neutral gatekeepers. We were somehow interfering with people's ability to put their message out. Really hard. You obviously have to have policies, you have to enforce them, but to do this at scale, really a huge challenge. Now, Facebook, Google, and others are hiring up thousands of people, and I'm hoping that that will really help. But think about whether that To Be Happy thing is app that I showed you at the beginning is a little bit relevant here. This is really hard. Let me give you another example. We used to not allow the word offensive terms. You couldn't say bad words. You couldn't create a screen name. You couldn't be, let me give you an example. You couldn't be dyke at AOL because you were doing that clearly in those days to be offensive. And then at some point, of course, we had complaints from various gay rights groups saying, wait a second, you're restricting our ability to express ourselves. We are using the term dyke not as a nasty, offensive term. We're using it in a positive, self-referential manner. I said, okay, I get it. We'll update our policy. And as we updated our policy, which now said that terms that are offensive may be used if they appear to be used in context in a positive, self-referential manner by a member of the group. And I got ready to ship that policy out to Oklahoma City, where we had teams that would be doing the reviews, and India and the Philippines. And by the way, translating that into different languages around the world. Whoa, wait a second. Other cultures may not be on the same page with our progressive reclamation of certain terms. And so what a complicated situation we create. And then, by the way, the people doing this, with great respect to their training, they're not all like judges and former Supreme Court clerks. They're human beings working all day trying to apply policy to a lot of offensive stuff they see, or a lot of stuff that's maybe just a hot button issue. We would just ban entire areas. We, for years, didn't even take any political ads because people would be offended. We didn't take issue ads because people would be offended. People didn't love that AOL was so heavy-handed and that we were enforcing our generic view of, wholesome America, and therefore not allowing room for stronger views. So maybe part of the answer is not creating giant liability and condemning the large tech players to be robotic overlords, because frankly, if they create technology, and again, hopefully technology can help, but if they're held liability to create technology to do this, well, the technology is going to be censoring this in ways that is probably overprotective. You create liability. If you told me when I was at AOL that, by the way, we were going to get pay fines, I would broadly over restrict, because maybe you're unhappy that your ad can't run, or that we take down your post, or we don't let you use your screen name, but at least I'm not going to jail, or the company's not paying penalties. And so this needs to be worked out in a self-regulatory manner, because penalties here create massive overregulation. Daphne Keller, a great scholar at Stanford's CIS, did a piece looking at some of the restrictions that Europeans are placing, and she said, well, I guess the Europeans are, welcoming our new robot overlords. And, she was being provocative, of course, but I get her point, right? Which is, are we creating a cure that's worse than the problem? I don't want to diminish the problem. And again, making sure that evil and bad stuff doesn't easily get into the ad ecosystem has got to be a priority. There's human review, there's technological review, but at the end of the day, we also, I think, need to step back and recognize that some of the negativity out there is us, Americans, putting out some very aggressive ideas and thoughts. And of course, we want to make sure that those of us who don't want to see that are not offended by it, and that we're not fanning the flames. But I think we do need to be careful and cautious and nuanced, and recognize that most of the problem is us reading this stuff, clicking on this, sharing on this, right? That was the real impact, frankly. Not so much that someone bought an ad, but that people who then saw it said, hey, yeah, great, and shared it and propagated it to their friends. So maybe don't click on that, right? Maybe take a look and let us see who's behind it. That's one of the key things Facebook is doing. So when you see an ad like that, you can say, well, wait, who's that from? Oh, that's from the opponent. Oh, I'm going to be skeptical about that, instead of maybe assuming that it's from your friend or the like. So combination of greater scrutiny. Now, here's what does have to happen, right? One of the real problems that does exist is that real bad actors, like people dropping malvertising ads that can infect your computer, can load up ads into the system. And this is where Facebook and Google have been pretty aggressive, but frankly, where really more needs to be done throughout the entire ecosystem. The idea that I get online and I see a banner ad and then my computer is infected, even if I don't click on it, is super frightening. And so there are industry efforts underway that I'd like to see accelerated to make sure, frankly, that bad actors who put ads that inject nasty code, assuming your browser has some flaws or isn't fully patched, that it can actually take over your computer and do horrible things. So that's my number one priority. Before I even get to having somebody analyze the content, can we make sure that criminals, real criminals, well, I guess those Russian ad people are criminals, but criminals who are going to do harm to my computer are not able to get their ads in the ecosystem. Certainly the companies adding more human review, so there are more eyeballs on there, doing more to have technology assist those reviews. But I think imposing the national advertising style restrictions, EFF, I'll ask our staff to post the link. I'm going to read it here on my second monitor, posted, what are the risks of applying election ad rules to the online world? And the reality is, having some room for anonymous speech is critical, right? Being able to put up an ad and maybe, certainly state your organization, but have some ability to be defending an unpopular cause or the like. So there's certainly some room for that. Facebook already has rules that say that only authentic pages, you can't create a fake page. So there does need to be a somebody behind those pages. And so certainly enforcing that a bit better. Take a look at the post, because I think they really make some good points about making sure that our cure and our big concern here doesn't overkill it. Frankly, a little more civility. And hey, some of you all out there, our policy and other friends, we could all behave a little bit better. I don't know how many times I've posted something on Twitter and it's about tech policy, but someone will jump in a way they would probably never ever say to my face, with some very harsh negative critique. And there are pleasant ways to say you're wrong, I disagree, I think your policy proposal here doesn't make sense. But the nastiness and the snarkiness, we're all sometimes part of the problem. So after venting a bit about that, I hope those are some useful policy points, but I'm going to go back on TBH over here. And as you can see, I'm being designated a total Slytherin. I don't take that negatively. My daughter tells me that Slytherin is not all bad from the house of Harry Potter, even though there have been a lot of bad players from that. But if you have an iPhone, why don't you download TBH and, I don't know, let's say some nice things about each other and make us all feel good. Thanks for joining. We'll put some of the links that I referred to in the comments, and have a good week.